Okay, great. So we'll ease into this. We want to welcome everyone. We want to honor a starting time, knowing we're going to have other guests join us throughout our time together. This is the Equitable Access to Nature session and panel. Bienvenidos to, this is the Green Latinos Winter National Summit. And as much as we wanted to support people being able to meet in person, we are within these realities. Having said that, to our panelists, stuff happens. So take care of what you need to in terms of if you have significant others, loved ones, pets wander into screen and whatnot, we will roll with it. Estamos aquí, to hold space to each other. To all of our audience, bienvenidos, bienvenidas to everybody. Want to add a couple of things. First, if you have questions that come up as we're together for this hour, don't hesitate to drop the questions into the chat. As well in there. We'll keep an eye out for them. We'll do our best to answer that, as well as drop in reflections, observations, flowers and cheers for our panelists. I'm excited to do all of this. Same thing, panelists, if there's things that you want to share with the audience in terms of a link, how to follow you on social media, resources or the like, don't hesitate to support that experience as well. I will start with a little bit of kind of an introduction, then turn it to each of the panelists for you to introduce yourselves, because I think you're the experts on yourselves, and it'd be great to have that as an offering rather than me making mistakes through an introduction. And then we're really excited and looking forward to after some initial questions that we're going to be joined by Senator Heinrich of New Mexico that will also be able to contribute a little bit on this question of equitable access and outdoor equity with nature and so forth. So that's kind of the front loading. So to start, saludos. My name is José González, he, him, his, though I'll respond to anything offered with joy and respect. I'm greeting you all from the traditional, ancestral, stolen, unceded, and occupied lands of the Nisenan, Nisenan, Southern Maidu, Miwok, among many others, in what is at the moment Sacramento, California, Zacatlan Califas. So saludos. I hold several hats, one of them being as the founder and director emeritus of Latino Outdoors. It was one of the first ways that I connected with Green Latinos way back in the day when Mark and fellow friends had an idea to create this type of powerful networking community. And joining us, we have few individuals who are respective leaders in this field. And so, Adriana, I'd love to start with you, and then we'll go over to you, Gabriel. I cede the floor for your introduction.
Thank you so much, Jose. Hola, bienvenidos. My name is Adriana. My pronouns are she, they, ella. I'm joining today from the ancestral lands of the Ohlone people, which is also known as Oakland, California. I was born in Manhattan, and I grew up in Astoria, Queens, and on Long Island. My background is in education, youth development, and community organizing. I am also a water sign, so shout out to all the Cancers out there. But I also have a deep love and connection to the desert. As you can see, I'm rocking my Brown Girl Surf t-shirt as well as my saguaro cactus earrings. So it's the duality for me. In March of 2020, I joined Brown Girl Surf as the associate director. And then in April 2021, we made the public announcement of Mira Manicum Shirley, who's one of our co-founders and former executive director. They were transitioning. And so I stepped into the role of executive director. Since then, Brown Girl Surf has changed my life. Personally and professionally, from standing up on the wave for the first time in Half Moon Bay to experiencing the beauty of Bolinas from the water, and then to surfing with confidence and joy this summer for the first time on the East Coast where I'm from. And so that was really beautiful to come back 360 to experience that. That's a little bit about me. And then I don't know if I should jump into more about Brown Girl Surf.
Yeah, well, actually, we'll do the individual introductions yet, and then we'll when you know you're ready and queuing up to share some about the organization and a video as well. So Gabriel, over to you in terms of introductions, and then we'll pass it over to Jalen.
Hi, everybody. I want to first thank Green Latinos for having me and for putting this great summit together. And thank you, Jose as well. I am from the ancestral homelands of the Ute and the Puebloan in Colorado. I think someone put that in the chat as well. Fruta, Colorado is where I reside. I work for the Wilderness Society as the Colorado Plateau representative. I'm also a part of other groups here in the state, like Next 100 Colorado, and been a Green Latino member for 3-4 years now, working on environmental justice work with their great team. For the Wilderness, I want to talk a little bit about myself and also about my work. First, for the Wilderness Society, I focus on public lands. I work on land management plans, equitable access to nature, oil and gas development, conservation designations, defending national monuments and bedrock conservation laws across the plateau, Colorado Plateau. And through this work, I've been fortunate to build relationships and work with like so many great people to protect and care for our natural world. I also have a deep connection to the Southwest. I've lived here all my life, and my family called New Mexico and Colorado home before it was the United States of America. And so with that connection, you know, I grew up going hunting, fishing, camping, like you name it. That's been something that was instilled in me as a kid. Also, like, I don't feel like I came to the environmental movement. I feel like it came to us. Like my family is always like, you know, farm to table, and we don't waste whatever we get, we use. All of those sorts of things is just something that's part of my family culture. I work with diverse communities, listening to their concerns and meeting them where they're at and working towards solutions. And that's been the most rewarding part of my work. Organizing at a community level has highlighted like a stark difference from communities, that the relationship they have with nature. I can go into more of my work, but if you'd like me to pause and then we can go back to that, I can do that as well.
Yeah, let's do that. And then that way, because we definitely will have an opportunity to talk about and get the audience to hear even deeper into the work that you do. And Jaylin, this is the opportunity for you to introduce yourself and the wholeness that you wish to offer.
Yate Shie Jaylin Yanabagoff. Hi, Jaylin Goff, and I am from the Diné tribe. I was born and raised in Gallup, New Mexico. However, I now live in Boulder, Colorado. I am the founder and executive director of an organization called Native Women's Wilderness, and we work in terms of getting Native women, girls, and our two-spirits, non-binary folks outside to share their stories. We also do a lot with land and water management. We have a campaign called Whose Land Are You Exploring or Wandering On, et cetera, and it feels really great to be here. Thank you.
Jaylin, welcome. And so before we dig a little bit deeper into kind of like what do we mean by equitable access, how we use equity and so forth, let's start by digging a little deeper into your respective work. And so I guess this will be the opportunity for anybody in the audience that may be unfamiliar with your organization, the work that it does, even if you already shared a little bit, provide more examples, as well as anything else you'd like to offer. So Adriana, we can start with you, and then just go in the same sequence, Gabriel and Jaylin.
So as I mentioned, I'm the executive director of Brown Girl Surf. We are a fiscally sponsored project that is based in Oakland. We run programs in Half Moon Bay, at Lindemar Beach in Pacifica, and then also now in Alameda Beach. And so we are a community of female identified and gender expansive people of color who seek female centered spaces of all ages and backgrounds. We love the ocean. We love to play in it. We love to share in the joy of connecting to the ocean and with others. We also strive to cultivate a community that lives in reciprocity with the earth, because in the end, the reason we surf is because we love the ocean. The ocean heals us and brings us joy. And as folks who love the ocean, we also work hard to take care of it and make it accessible to all. So we were founded in 2011, and then our programming began in 2013. And so since then, our work has evolved and grown immensely, I would say in the past 2 years, around our advocacy work. And so our mission, our goal is to build a more diverse, environmentally reverent, and joyful surf culture by increasing access to surfing, cultivating community, and amplifying the voices of female identified surfers and gender expansive folks, and by taking care of the earth. So we do this through our community surf programming, which is known as Soul Surfer programming. our environmental education and ocean conservation, which is, I would say, informally woven through our programming during the year, and then definitely deeply woven into our curriculum during summer camp. And then, as I mentioned, our growing advocacy work that addresses some of the barriers that have prevented communities of color from feeling welcome at the beach and in the world of surfing. And I wanted to play a little clip of a video to hear from one of our rock star Rising Leader Youth, Indigo, who shares a little bit about her experience that we did in partnership with YR Radio, another nonprofit in Oakland. And you'll get to hear a little bit from Mira, one of our co-founders.
Being like a Black girl, you don't see a lot of other people that look like you in the ocean or really in outdoor spaces in general. So I just really hope to gain that sense of empowerment and that sense of community that tells me that I can be in the water, like the water is my place. I'm allowed to be there. Sometimes it is intimidating because the majority of the people are white men. So yeah, sometimes it just doesn't feel super welcoming or comfortable being out there.
If Brown Girl Surf is successful, this idea of localism will be a thing of the past. This idea that, like, if you didn't have the privilege of growing up at a surf spot is not going to make you any lesser of a surfer, or that's not going to be a thing that is a barrier to you feeling like you belong.
Brown Girl Surf!
Okay, I hope I took the share screen off. This hop-in is a little new for me, but that was just to share a little bit more of our work. And I'll actually share the link to the full short documentary that was done in production with YR Radio. So thank you, and I'll pass it over to Gabriel.
Excellent. Dale, Gabriel.
Brown Girl Surf, I love that. That's really cool. So the Wilderness Society's we're a national nonprofit. We've been around, I think, 1940, I believe. So a long time. I've been with the organization for 7 years and in this role for 3.5 years. And I know I mentioned quite a few things that I work on, but what I really want to focus on is, accessing equitable access to the outdoors. As I was saying, is organizing with, diverse communities, noticing that difference, the stark difference that certain communities have with nature. One of the common themes is a lack of access to the outdoors. And so marginalized populations, particularly people of color and low medium income homes, face real barriers in accessing natural spaces and public lands, as many of you may know. And the pandemic exposed inequalities in our nation, neighborhoods in Colorado, which is where I focus a lot of my work this past year. Neighborhoods in Colorado had the worst population, poor public health, worst pollution, with the worst pollution, poor public health, and limited access to outdoor spaces have been hit harder, and that has had dire repercussions. In Colorado, statistics show that Black and Latino families are the most nature deprived of all races and ethnicities, yet they're becoming the largest part of our state's economy by the day. By 2050, an estimated 48% of the state's labor force will consist of people of color. And I mention that is because recognizing this from community and state leaders in an effort to address this disparity, a coalition was formed, led by Next 100 Colorado and our state representative, Leslie Herod, as well as 70 local, state, and national organizations aimed to give Coloradans more equitable access to outdoor experiences and outdoor education. And the goal was to establish an outdoor equity grant program that centers funding on low-income youth with disabilities, LGBTQ populations, and racially and ethnically diverse Coloradans. So by investing in new and existing programs and organizations working in community to build bridges to the outdoors for youths with limited opportunities, it helps to reach our goal. We're not there yet by any means, but by making the outdoor accessible to all. And on June 21st, 2021, Governor Polis signed into law the Colorado Outdoor Equity Grant Program, and the grant applications will be open spring of this year. So there's a lot more that I could go into on that work. It's been a great effort where we've had, communities from all over the state come together on this, bipartisan and just, rural, urban communities. So it's really been exciting work, and I look forward to helping support, that effort, not only nationally, but hopefully in other states as well. Thank you. I'll pass it to Jalen.
Gracias. Jalen.
Wow, these organizations are amazing. I feel so honored to be with everyone here. So as you know, Native Women's Wilderness, we've been here for about going on, I think, our 4th year. And it's been kind of a whirlwind. It's been amazing. So like I mentioned earlier, we talk about things like whose land are you exploring on, or whose land are you skiing on, et cetera, et cetera. But we also do a lot with murdered and missing Indigenous women, and really talking about the disparity of that and the trauma that we suffer as Native women or Two Spirits. And I think that for us, we have the duality of the trauma of the land and the waters on top of being Native women. And I think that's something that NWW has done a really good job of, is tracking and talking about this. Clinical studies show that if you don't talk about the trauma, it continues to feed and it continues to cycle throughout our communities. And I feel like NWW allows and gives the voice to the voiceless, because, Native people, we're kind of at the lowest of the lows. We're classified, down there. And so I really feel like NWW has given awareness and brought strength to our women's voices to talk about these disparities. And I think what's really beautiful and unique for NWW is, for Native people, we have this deep connection to the land and waters, right? Like, it's not just going to bag that peak or send that route. There's a relationship within it. There's a spiritual journey within it. For example, when I go out into the woods or in the mountains or in the deserts of my homelands, when I'm going somewhere new, I tend to introduce myself, Yate, Shie, Jalen, Yinabagaf. And I just kind of take pause to reflect and to bring it in and to listen. And there have been times where I have come across a new territory, or a territory that is not my people's, and I have been given the feelings or the notice that I'm not welcome at that point. And so, like, learning to respect that. And there are other times where I come on to new territories or go to my homelands, and it feels like my ancestors are kind of wrapping me in their safe arms, and it's kind of beautiful, because I've been spending more and more time in Alaska. And when I first arrived to Alaska, I've never had a connection to a land like I have with Alaska. Like, I had that connection to the Southwest and, the Diné territories. But I've never had that connection like I've had with Alaska. Alaska feels like it's home, right? But it's a different type of home. But it's beautiful because, we, science-wise, we have migrated down from the Athabascan, from the Alaskan territory. But in terms of traditions and our culture, Diné, we grew out and we came out of the fourth world into the Southwest where we are. So it's, yeah. But, having these conversations with NWW and having the water conservancy conversation and land rights and public lands, right? And having those hard conversations that, yes, why am I saying public lands in quotations? Because this is stolen land, right? It's not public for everyone. It's talking about the discrimination of color, classism, in privilege, going onto the land and camping or, doing whatever. There's a privilege there, right? There's all these isms to go onto our land. And so I feel like NWW has really introduced this nuanced idea or feel of knowledge of like, let's sit down and have these hard conversations, because this is the land our ancestors walked on, and this is our land, even though that it has been taken away from us, and there's been pillage and rape and theft and, broken treaties, like you name it, we've gotten through it. And I think the beauty still lies in that we still have that deep connection to the land, right? We still are family. We are still grounded to the earth, to the waters, and really having that beautiful relationship with one another, but creating more content and knowledge to bring forth to our non-native communities.
Thank you, Jalen. I wanted to hold both space for the reality of all of the work that you do, along with some humor, as it's like, oh, doesn't that, we can understand why you're busy. But and I say that both because I know I've appreciated your friendship and being able to hold the space for all of that.
I'll always have a place of whiskey for you.
There you go. And I think a lot of what you shared is going to be, it's a good transition into the next question. So the question is going to be around, we talk about equitable access to nature, but what do we mean by equity in relation to nature, to the outdoors, and so forth? Like, what does that mean to you? And before I kind of throw it over to you, I want to acknowledge all participants. Thank you for commenting on the chat, providing resources for each other. The panelists, of course, can answer your questions in the chat as well, and they'll be, and you're welcome to weave them into your responses. I'm not sure if I'm going to share my astrological sign, but maybe. We'll see. So with that, it's that question, and probably in about 10 minutes or so, we may be joined by Senator Heinrich, and we'll ask this question to him as well. But so how do you define equity in relation to the outdoors and to nature? What does that mean to you? And Adriana, we'll start with you, and then you can choose who you'd like to invite to answer it next.
Wow. How do we define equity in the outdoors? I think it's a loaded question, right? It's complicated. It comes with a lot of layers. And I think for me, being in the position that I'm in, I think it day to day, it kind of changes what kind of priorities are coming up. But for us at Brown Girl Surf, kind of I don't want to say the North Star, but where our mission and what has been in our DNA around it has been, creating a safe space and affinity space for folks that have been historically excluded or not been represented in the media, and the way that we have been, I say, taught or shown by Hollywood, right? Who is a surfer and who goes to the beach and who has access to the beach and the coast, and without recognizing in the mainstream media that surfing in all forms is an indigenous sport. And so for us, some of the ways that we do that at Brown Girl Surf is by addressing various of the barriers that our communities face, right? And so it may be financial, it might be historical, logistical, having access to the gear, to the wetsuits, getting to the beach, right? The closest beginner beach break from the East Bay is Lindamar, where we hadn't had access to legally operate our programming. And then I think some of the barriers that aren't discussed enough that we talk about is the cultural barriers, and then also the invisible barriers that one of our volunteers has spoken about. And I think about it a lot. It's not just my experience, but that invisible barrier is already like, I can't do that. It doesn't suit me. I don't fit in there. And you've already created this entire dialogue or experience, and you haven't even left your house to go experience being in the water, or maybe you getting out of your car and you see a bunch of other folks that don't look like you at the beach. And then I've done it. Like, that's, something that I've experienced. And I'm like, okay, maybe not today. I'm just going to take a walk. Right. And so that, I think, is some of the beauties that Brown Girl Surf is addressing the inequities by creating it, is through representation, having a space where our community feel a sense of safety and belonging and welcoming. And then also by working, more recently on a policy and advocacy level. So working on a local level in Pacifica and working with the city to address their inequitable permitting system, which I'm very proud and happy to say that our community has successfully accomplished that, and that's been approved. And that is just one step in addressing some of that will create a more equitable process to accessing the coast, right? When we talk about equitable access to nature, it's oftentimes historically been talking about land, but ocean, as Jalen mentioned, it's the lands and the ocean and the way that our people and our communities connect to nature. And so those are some of the ways that we're bringing it to the conversation.
Adriana. And Senator Heinrich, welcome. You're joining us just into the question that was going to be appropriate for you. But before we kind of drop that question as well, we wanted to provide a few minutes for you to say hello and introduce yourself. Uh-oh, we can't hear you. Okay. It wouldn't be a teleconference without audio or other. No, still no. Well, and that's okay. I think as that's being sorted out, not a problem. Adriana, I did mention that you can choose who to invite to speak next. So, dale.
I'm going to switch it up, and I'm going to invite Jalen to step up next.
Thank you. You brought up so many great points, and I really enjoyed your point about saying that the gear, right? Like the gear to go outside. It's interesting because I feel like we have this mentality of like, you need Patagonia, you need the North Face, you need Mountain Hardwear, like you need all of the stuff to go outside because that's what marketing is doing. Marketing is also showing up on who is allowed outside, right? Who has the passageway to go outside. And for the longest time, it's been white, cis, male, female people. And I really think that has pivoted or brought us into this loophole of who's allowed or who's, safe. I think that's a fair term to use, is who the safetiness, right? I mean, there's many times like I go backpacking by myself, and the safety component really worries me because I'm a female woman. I am a Navajo, Diné. The fact that there's such a high epidemic for murdered and missing Indigenous women is always on the back of my mind. So really thinking about equity and outside, I think it's something that I'm always struggling and I'm always kind of pushing back against. Because in my mind, when I hear equity, I hear something for all. And the outdoor industry is not doing that, right? The outdoor industry is cleaning billions of dollars upon stolen lands. And how much of that money is pushed or resources pushed back into the Native communities or back into communities who live in poverty or BIPOC communities. And so I feel like that's such a touchy word of equity. I feel like we are wanting to strive towards that, but we're not there yet. There's so much more work to do in terms of equity. And it's like organizations like our own, right, that are striving for equity, that are striving to bring brown women out surfing, that are striving to bring brown people out to the wilderness or to the land. And it's people like Jose who are working on different committees. You're on like 100 committees, you're on like 50 boards, you're like board chair for like every other one. I don't know what you are. You're all of the above. So it's like all of like we're doing the work, right? We're working hard, but I feel like for me on a personal level, we're nowhere close to equity.
Thank you so much, Jalen. And I'll dig up the number. We'll do a quick pause and see if Senator Heinrich, if your audio's back.
Jose, can you hear me this time?
There we go. Yes, you're
All
live.
right. Fantastic. Well, thank you for this opportunity and for everyone who's participating today. It's really inspiring to learn about all the great work that's being done around the country to create more equitable access for the outdoors. From my days starting out really as an outdoor educator, as an outfitter guide, and then just as a father, getting my own kids out on the landscape and on our shared lands, I've just seen time and again how transformational getting especially young people out into these landscapes is, how it can inspire somebody to a lifetime of purpose and commitment, whether that's to conservation or science or to their community, just how powerful it can be as medicine, and the connection that it can create with place. And that's a connection that I find is just missing all too often in our modern and digital world. Jalen on her Instagram, I've seen, seems to be able to pull those things together, but I think a lot of us aren't able to do that effectively in our own lives. And, getting outside just encourages so many things that I think are critical and shouldn't be a privilege. I think we can all agree that outdoor opportunities and life in the outdoors should be accessible to every single person in our communities, regardless of their zip code, where they come from, who their people are, the size of their bank account, or certainly their skin color. But if we're going to achieve that, it really requires an enormous number of conversations like the ones you're having today, and the reality of addressing very real and specific barriers. We need to recognize that while the livelihoods of people of color have been long rooted in the outdoors, they haven't had equitable access to our landscapes, to many kinds of open spaces that too many Americans, I think, take for granted. So we have to devote real, actual, adequate resources if we're going to expand those opportunities into communities that have been historically excluded from outdoor experiences. And I'm really proud of the leadership in my home state of New Mexico. Our state created the first of its kind outdoor equity fund. That's something that I've been able to learn from. It's really designed to help community-driven programs connect kids from underserved communities to all sorts of outdoor experiences. And I'm excited about the conversation that's spurred nationwide with California and Colorado now having followed suit in creating similar programs. And I want to bring this type of work to all of our local communities and think through how we can really scale that from New Mexico and Colorado and California to a national level. So I'm proud to have been working closely with a pretty inspiring national group of leaders from communities of color in the Outdoor Future Initiative to think through how we might take this idea and scale it nationally. And so I'm working with them on draft legislation that we hope will really help address barriers in access, provide new opportunities, and engage communities who should be right in their wheelhouse, but because of these barriers has precluded them from things that I believe should be inherent in the experience of every single American. So for folks tuning into this discussion who lead educational outdoor trips, I just want to say I'm also proud to report that we're creating some real momentum to pass legislation as well that's going to make it easier for community groups to get into the outdoors. The permit system on our shared spaces and public lands has long been a barrier in many cases to doing really no-brainer outdoor work. And as a former outfitter guide, I can speak to the direct frustration of of having to deal with that system. And we're doing our best to try to pass legislation to simplify that I think is going to be hopefully advancing out of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the coming weeks. I'll take just my last moment to mention another bill called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act that we're really starting to build momentum for. It's the first really robust nationwide wildlife legislation in the tradition of things like Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson, that in addition to funding wildlife recovery at the state level, also supports tribal wildlife agencies. And I think we can really recognize that in the last few years, especially in the last 2 years with what we have all been through, our wildlife and our shared spaces have been the highlight for a lot of people who have struggled in the last couple of years. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that everyone has that promise, not just as a promise, but a real opportunity to experience what those places can mean for your well-being. And so that's why I really appreciate the opportunity to join all of you today.
Much. Before I invite Gabriel on this topic as well, I want to acknowledge that, Senator, it does matter, in my opinion. I think it's important that someone as yourself, as an elected official, and of course in the decision-making position that it comes with, is here on this panel with community leaders in respective levels of organizing. And so I want to just thank you for that, because it does make a difference.
Thank you, Jose.
And I know we're getting all kinds of questions coming into the chat. So Gabriel, I want to get your quick thoughts in on what equity means to you. And the reason I'm asking this question is because we're using it a lot. And Gabriel, you started by mentioning, the outdoor equity program in Colorado. And so is part of the question to say, well, what are some of the things we mean by that? So as we move through some of the barriers as being noticed into solutions, we have that picture of what we're anchoring it around.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator Heinrich, for joining as well. I think it's a really cool space they have going on here. I mean, a lot has already been touched on by the other panelists, but, I think some of the big ones in Colorado, and I'm sure we're seeing this in other parts of the country, are lack of resources and lack of green spaces and these disproportionately impacted communities, and then the unjust experiences people of color have in the outdoors. As touched on, it costs money to get out into the natural world, whether that be, national parks, national monuments, et cetera. And then to do those activities other than maybe hiking. And even then, you need the right shoes and whatnot. And so if you want to make that equitable, you're going to have to be able to fill that gap in different ways. And I think there's ways to achieve that, state by state. And it's exciting to hear that work is ongoing. Also, there's the challenges of parents who, are working 2 jobs, who just don't have the time to get away, or many families from these communities would probably just love to go to a nearby park, and that gets to that lack of green spaces. And this kind of ties into the systemic issues that are there. But if there's a way, and I believe there is, to create more adequate green spaces in these communities, that would go a long way as well. And then, as part of that, I think helping to clean up pollution, air and water in these areas. I think access to the outdoors and pollution for many of these communities go hand in hand. And so that's just what I wanted to highlight real quick, and then we can move on to questions.
Thank you, because I know with this group, we can talk this all day long, and we're time constrained. So I think those are the realities. So I just want to acknowledge this for questions that are coming in, drop links, all of that good stuff. So this next question that I want to throw at you is, one of the reasons for outdoor equity funds has been noted both at the state and even the proposal at the federal level, is that it acknowledges lack of resources, often for not just programming, but who's getting to lead those programmings. Because often you can get money to build the parks, to build the trails, right? Like the capital infrastructure, sometimes we talk about it, but that's not always available for the actual support of the connection. Olivia in the chat is mentioning, for example, like the Oregon measure for that, it sets up outdoor school for all kids. In Oregon as another example of that. So my question to you all is, what is another example, you can be as specific or as broad as you like, in terms of a way to address an inequity that you currently see? What barrier is it tackling, and what's the solution? In the way that either you see it, that you're working on it, that you think we should be more working on it. I want to both honor what that might look like for you at the local level, at the state level, of course, at the national level. Senator, would you like to kick us off and then invite the next?
Sure. You know, I really when I was working on the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks in southern New Mexico, one of the things that became evident to me really quickly was that some of the most supportive communities actually had the least access to the landscape that we were working to protect. Because of those barriers, because of transportation, because of financial barriers, just because of separation of distance, because of where the neighborhoods were compared to where some of the more recreational and other accessible areas were there. And I realized that we need to layer a bunch of different solutions on top of each other. So Great American Outdoors Act, we were able to provide permanent funding for Land and Water Conservation Fund. Well, when a state chooses to create a plan that directs that money to create, first off, parks in individual communities, individual neighborhoods, so that every child lives within walking distance of a park, that's one piece of this, right? Where you get that introduction to open space. And having a intentional program in place, whether it's an outdoor equity fund or a charitable effort or whatever it is, to make sure that for those kids who have the least access to the bounty of outdoor resources that we have in the state of New Mexico, for example, there's something connecting their educational experience or their after-school experience or their recreational experience to those places. And really layering these things on top of each other, because if we're not intentional about this and it's just, whatever effort seems to garner the most resources or have the most momentum, I think we're not going to fill the gaps that will be most meaningful in the long run.
Thank you. And you get to invite who answers next.
Adriana, do you want to chime in?
Sure. I feel like I'm queued up a lot, but I don't mind going. I really appreciate this question, Jose. I think there's three things that come to mind, and they're not in any specific order. I think it's oftentimes how we kind of talk about this work at Brown Girls Surf, but it's not limited to these three solutions. I think it's representation, as I mentioned, and so representation, like some of the organizations that we're representing here through the panelists. I think also the organization that you founded, Jose, Latino Outdoors, other organizations like Outdoor Afro as well. And so not only thinking about representation, but also folks that physically look like you, but also share similar experiences that you have, whether it's growing up or your current experience, like myself as an adult, right? Like that's important. And that makes a difference. And that also creates what you had mentioned, the sense of safety. It's physical safety, emotional safety, mental safety. And having those affinity spaces creates that. I think the second piece that, again, some of our organizations have addressed as well, and Senator has also addressed, is advocacy and policy change. And, for us at Brown Girls Surf, we understand and recognize the importance of equitable coastal access for communities of color. And we've definitely been a more vocal advocate or growing in that, and working with land managers, environmental educators, and policymakers And, it led to a successful campaign in Pacifica. And so how do we continue that momentum? And as Jose, as you mentioned, is continuing the conversations at the state and local level and federal level, where organizations such as ours, small grassroots that have the trust, right? That is essential. The trust with these communities that are in churches and they're at the barbershop and the bodega, and they're talking, and that's where that trust is built, where people are going to start to feel like, okay, this is a place that I want to go because I feel safe. These are my people, right? And so inviting those folks to conversations where there is policy and advocacy change happening. Brown Girl Surf has been invited to several nationwide coalitions, and very humbled and honored to be at a level where there is heavy Indigenous representation through Ocean Justice Forum, from Alaska to Hawaii, to the Gulf of Mexico, and we're all coming together to share the experiences of our community to create an impact and influence federal policy. And the last piece, which for me has really been coming up a lot, is the mindset change. And this is something that I've mentioned in many other conversations, and unfortunately policy cannot address this, but it's can be through education and continued conversations like today in the Summit on Green Latinos, is recognizing and acknowledging that access is the first step in creating solutions. Then we have to ensure the sense of belonging and welcoming and inclusion and safety in outdoor spaces at the beach. Because for us at Brown Girl Surf, our goal is to create a space for folks to, whether they've been surfing for 20 years or it's their first time being at the ocean, right? With their auntie, their grandma, nieces and sisters and siblings. But then we also want it to be a place where they feel like they can go there without Brown Girl Surf, where they are welcome as well. And so if they're not experiencing that due to, folks have mentioned the harassment of law enforcement, local officials, and even locals, as Mira had mentioned, we're hoping that to make a thing of the past. And so that's the more complicated and loaded aspect of all of the solutions. But as we continue to engage in conversation and continue to acknowledge, right, it's really important that we acknowledge that that is also a pressing issue for our communities to feel safe and welcome in the outdoors. And I guess I'm going to pop it over to someone else. Okay. I'm going to pop it over to you, Gabriel, this time.
Are we on time? Do we have just a minute left?
Technically speaking, but I think if we take 1, 2, or 3, we'll still be okay.
Okay, I'll be quick then. I think you hit on so many great points there. And, just to echo what's already been said, I think having funding for these programs that touch down in community is big. Resources is huge. You can't really mobilize folks if you don't have the resource for that. I think one thing that I'm not sure if I heard, but transportation, having transportation that's public and affordable, so that not just youth can get out there, but families can get out there. I mean, coming from growing up in a Latino family, and a lot of my community and friends, and I can't speak for all communities, but just for Latino families, like to do things as a family. So having that access for everyone, I think is also important, and also to help with that shift, to get people to care about these places and in a deeper, build that deeper relationship. You have to get out there and experience it before you can grow to love it, and then you'll want to protect it. And so I'll just say that real quick and then pass that along to Jalen.
Awesome to be in a cohort of amazing minds and voices. I feel like I'm going to be the one who comes in and swoops in and knocks off all of the good stuff and just puts it for real. Let's talk about the real stuff right now. So I'm going to be that cat that comes up and then just I think there has to be a lot of healing, a lot of healing within the trauma of the lands, within the trauma of the people. And I don't know when or if that could ever happen. There's a lot of colonization out there. There's a lot of taking items and taking things away from people and expectations. And, I think that's a hard one to tackle. It's like an onion. It's layers and layers and layers that you have to continuously peel off. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, the word equitable in going alongside of outdoors, for me, it's not a parallel idea. I like the idea, but we're not there by any means. And I think with the country right now split so much in half, and the racism and the colonization, I think that's also a huge spot of where we need to start. You know, like going outside and being safe is not for example, I don't have the blessing, or however you want to say, to go outside as a white man, right? And I think knowing also that, you know, so many of our lands was stolen from Native people, and so much of the water in our lands are still continuously being raped and abused, and you know, there's just this displacement, right? And I think that's when we have to start talking about policy, and that's when we have to start advocating for various laws and bills to be brought into. You know, I am really proud of Deb Holland coming into, you know, the position that she's coming into, and then having, you know, a Native man be part, you know, the head of the parks. You know, like these are like starting to happen, and there's these conversations. The Savannah Act is another really good point. I love, love, love being a part of the Outdoor Future Initiative, and there's another Native man who's on it as well. And we have these conversations. Like we talk about the misuse of the word of public lands, because it's not public for all of us. You know, these lands have been stolen and taken from us. And there's a huge disparity in trauma and hurt and pain still within these places. And so having these hard conversations of, yes, let's talk about all of the cool unicorn star stuff, but like in reality, for many Native people, we have to talk about this shitty stuff, right? Like we have to talk about this stuff. And yeah, I honestly don't know. Again, going back into policy, like this is where it starts, right? So yeah, I could go on and on about this conversation, but I'm just gonna, I know we only have a couple minutes, so.
No, thank you, Jaylyn. I know we're at time and I want to honor that. So I'm going to, without overly stressing the organizers, what I will say this, I'm going to give you a challenge, a small challenge, each of you. And I'll tell you what it is, and then I'll provide some closing words to give you time to think about it. If you were to select one, oh, sorry, Jaylyn, we're looking at your screen there. If you were to think of one word or one sentence, not a paragraph, one word or one sentence that either comes to mind or reflection or something you want to offer to the audience, to do so. If it's going to be too stressful, then you can just pass, and that's okay. But so think about that in terms of a word, whether it's hits with the reality, whether it's inspirational, whether it's reflective, whether it's instructive, a word or a sentence. And so think about that. I'll ask you each for that as a closing statement. And then audience, I want to thank you all. I encourage you all to, of course, follow the respective organizations, to check into the legislation that the senator mentioned, and to think about the ways that you are a network and provide resources for each other in the chat. And that we know that this is a spectrum of work that includes the conceptual framing, acknowledging stolen lands and broken treaties, historical oppression and trauma, the role of policy as an instrument and tool to do that, but also a lot of the relational and other structural work, along with ongoing mental model change. So it's a lot, but this is why we're here and we do it. So with that, let's move to some closing word or sentence, and we'll give it a try. Gabriel, if you want, we'll start with you, over to Jaylyn, Senator Heinrich, and then Adriana.
Oh, wow. Pressure. I don't have anything profound to share on this topic in particular, but I would just say that I believe it's a human right for children to experience a healthy nature and apply the 7 generations to it. We need to leave the world a better place than we found it.
Thank you. Jaylyn.
I'm so sorry, Jose. Can you repeat the question? My internet.
No, it's okay. One word or sentence to close.
Healing.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Senator?
together.
Love it. And Adriana?
I put my sentences in the chat, but my word is joy.
Joy. Love it. Thank you all. We're at time. I want to honor and make sure because everybody will still have places to be, both physically and digitally. So looking forward to all the ways that this conversation will continue in different forms. Thank you to all the panelists, Gabriel, Adriana, Jalen, I'll say Martin, but also Senator Heinrich. Great that you could be here, and looking forward to working with you all in different ways. Nos vemos.